Grodan has set the standard with their stone wool products, helping cultivators grow a cleaner, more efficient, reliable, and consistent crop throughout. That's why we welcomed John Medio, the managing director of Grodan North America, into our facility to see how we're implementing stone wool products. From our clone room to our veg and flower hall, we use stone wool throughout our facility. We sat down with John to discuss our strategic partnership, as well as some of the research and development that we're using Grodan's products for. Now, I hope you enjoyed this conversation we had with Gary from Endless and John from Grodan. Enjoy. Some of the things that people look for in this industry are uniformity, scalability, and overall cleanliness of a product. That's why a partnership between Endless and Grodan just made so much sense. We're happy to be sitting down with John from Grodan and Gary from Endless to discuss how our partnership is not only helping us achieve those three things, but set new standards in this industry. John, Gary, thanks for sitting down with me today.
No, thanks for having me.
Gary, you're the co-founder of Endless, also the Chief Innovation Officer. We've heard plenty about you and what you do throughout the day. But John, what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Wow. Well, I'm the managing director for Grodan, so I'm responsible for the North American business. Grodan is a division of Rockwool. Obviously, we use our high-tech stone wool substrates in all types of horticulture applications. So on a day-to-day basis, I spend most of my time on the phone and on a computer. But here I am. I steer the business in North America, both commercially and strategically. And so I spend most of the time out with customers, out in grows and greenhouses of various kinds, and meeting with our team all over the country.
What is it that some of the growers say about Grodan and the stone wool products? Are you hearing anything like consistently throughout the country and in this industry?
Yeah, particularly in the cannabis industry, Grodan has been an introduction to allow them to crop steering, right? I mean, fundamentally 65 years ago, Grodan was founded on the ability to use stone wool to drive crop steering and crop steering applications. And so what do they say? They say they value the consistency of Grodan, the reliability, the local team, the local manufacturing. At the end of the day, stone wool is a technological product, right? It takes a lot of work, a lot of engineering, a lot of knowledge to produce it well and consistently, and that's what they get from Grodan. Add to that our decades of knowledge in horticulture and growing, our fantastic advice teams and crop knowledge scientists. All that is what you get when you grow on with Grodan.
So for those who don't know, what is stone wool? What is the block made of? What is the inner working?
Yeah, that greenish, yellowish cotton candy, everybody says, what is it? Well, the interesting thing is it's actually a natural product. It was developed in the early 1900s, and I say developed because, in fact, it's a natural process. If you see volcanic activity, lava gets whipped up in the winds and ends up on trees, and you get these fibers. Fundamentally, that's what Rockwool and Grodan do. We create a volcano. We whip stone, mostly basalt rock, melt it down up to upwards of 2,000 degrees, create a lava, and then we fiberize that lava. It creates a blanket, and you get stone wool, what we call stone wool. And it's an incredibly magical material because it fundamentally is made from rock. So all of the fire properties and the thermal properties that we use for our building material products at the same time have value in the horticulture substrates when it comes to sterility and consistency and the cross-linking and then the capillary action of the actual fibers. And so that's fundamentally what it is. So it's a wool. That's why it looks like a wool. It looks like fiberglass because its concept is the same, but it's made differently than fiberglass.
It's so crazy to learn about how that is made because a lot of people just see like, oh, I'm going to grow in dirt, I'm going to grow in cocoa, whatever. But to know that there's a product out there that's been, like I said, developed over so many years.
Yeah.
You guys are doing such great work, and I know with Endless, we have just been so blessed to be a part of this and be a partner with you guys. So that's kind of where I want to go with you, Gary, is how did we start using Grodan? Obviously, it wasn't out the gate we started using their product, correct?
Well, our first use of it was a failure.
Okay. Good start.
Well, I mean, the advantages, as you mentioned, we looked at it, and I looked at it, and I saw those advantages. I saw we were growing in cocoa at the time, bringing in bags, typical bugs, inconsistencies, high salt content or inconsistent salt content, all these negative things, labor from transplanting and all this other stuff. And frankly, I didn't like it. And so I started looking at Rockwool, and I decided to try it one day, but I didn't really know that much about it. I didn't research it. We weren't doing true crop steering methodology. We were just watering based on weight and things like that. And that's when we first started. And so the first time I tried it, it did okay, I would say, but to me it was a failure. And then we went away from it. And when we got the new facility that we have today, that's a large facility. It's high production. We're producing flour now. We're doing RTFs and all this stuff. And in that sense, I did not want to bring bags into the grow because I knew it was bringing bugs and other issues and the inconsistency in salts and other things. And frankly, it's also hard to get sometimes, the kind you typically like. So we decided to go back to Rockwell, but this time I did my homework. And so I started reading their white papers, understanding how it was made, understanding why it was made a certain way, how the structure of it and the fibers and all this. And then I started reading through their crop steering methodology. And so we started using it again, but this time we started applying a basic crop steering and we started seeing success. And it took us a few rounds to get to that point. And then that's when we realized how it's cheaper, easier, lower maintenance costs, or lower labor costs, I should say, and maintenance costs because it doesn't bring bugs. We don't have to mess with it. We don't have to heat it up. We don't have to flush it out and all the other things you have to do with other media. And we started realizing, man, this is just a better way to go. And then once we started applying the science aspect to it and started pushing the plant because of the capabilities of Rockwell, that's when we started seeing the true capability and results of it. And that's at that point I realized this is the best way to grow. Like I tell everybody, my personal opinion is Rockwell is by far superior to any other media to grow in. And because we see that, we do it, we prove it all the time, right? And so that's kind of what led us up to that point.
I think one thing that you said that was really important is doing the research into the product firsthand, because it seems like a lot of people just kind of hear it through the grapevine of some stuff, but learning that, like you said, no bugs, it's such a clean product, and if you start clean, you end clean, and that's one thing that we really do enjoy about Stonewall. So with Gary, Endless Biotech is, again, known for that precision and cleanliness. How did Stonewall and Grodan's product really support that throughout the grow?
Well, a lot of what I just said is when you go look at a grow store, any grow store, and you're buying cocoa or whatever that product is, go look where they store it. Almost every one of them, I would say, well, at least 50 or 60% it's stored outside. And it's raining. These bags have holes in them for aeration. And we would go buy cocoa, like, this one's really heavy. It's because it's full of water, which means it's also full of bugs, right? And because they're storing it outside, it's a perfect habitat for critters, right? It's that simple. And then, of course, depending on which brand you happen to buy at the time, you'll have huge amounts of salt, 600 ppm or greater. Some of them would have less than 100, but the next time you buy it, it'd be 200. It's just so inconsistent in their approach. And it's just not something that we wanted. And so when we went over to Rockwell, we eliminated all that. We eliminated the constant bugs, especially root aphids and spider mites, which were the two typical ones we would see. We didn't see that anymore. And then, of course, it's the labor of transplants and stuff, where you just take a clone and you drop it in a little hole after you soak it for an hour. Now, one of the things that we did learn that we found was a little bit problematic, but it was our fault for not realizing that how it worked truly, was if you don't pre-soak it, we pre-soak them for an hour. If you don't do that, then you won't have a good structure to grow in. You got to pre-soak that and prep it for actual grow, just like you do any media, really, right? But it's critical that we soak it for a minimum of an hour, and that gets all the fibers moist and water. It makes sure you don't have any channeling and so on. And then we also tried other products, and that's again why we stuck with Grodan, because their product always worked consistently. We tried a couple of other brands, and we would always see channeling or leaching out of the product. It didn't hold water properly, or it was inconsistent, and especially channeling. And so when you get channeling, you don't get an even root zone production, which means your plant's not going to do even. And so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the end of the day, what Grodan provides is a medium and a tool for which whatever you want it to do, it will do. If you treat it perfectly and you use it correctly, I equate it to a very, very sharp chef's knife. In the hands of an expert chef, it works extremely well. If you don't pay attention to it, you don't use it properly, don't water it, don't wet it up properly, or store it incorrectly. Of course, you could store it wrong and you could develop stuff, but it's not coming from the Stonewall. It's coming from whatever else was put on it, because at the end of the day, the Stonewall only does what you tell it to do. That's kind of how I extreme it. So it's the perfect use for crop steering, because it allows you to give the plant what you want when you want it, and know that it's going to go to the plant. Nothing else is coming into it. It's not introducing other compounds or anything else. So, that's the base of what we offer, and we work tirelessly to ensure that and that consistency from block to block. I mean, there's millions and millions and millions of blocks and slabs out there, and we try very hard to make sure that this block is the same as the block you get tomorrow and the same as the block you get 6 months from now.
And that's actually what led us into the course like we taught today, was people would come into our grow, see the production that we have and the quality of plants we have, and they go, we want to do that, teach us. We would teach them, we go, but we use Rockwell, and that would scare them. Oh, you could kill a plant, you can, all this other stuff. Well, you can kill a plant in any media. It's not as forgiving as other media, but you grow better in other media. So that's why one of the reasons why we started teaching courses is to get them familiar and give them a base understanding of how to do concepts of how to set up a Rockwell block, and then how to steer a Rockwell block.
That's a good thing to bring up. We did have the crop steering class today, and teaching people, they have the doubts about some of the products. But John, you took a tour of our facility today. What did you see throughout our grow with us using crop steering methodology and Stonewall product?
I saw an amazing variety of scientific activity going on, right? I thought it was very impressive as you went from room to room and stage to stage to see the approach that Endless takes to crop steering and to really all of the scientific aspects. And I put that in quotes not because it's not scientific, but like you said in the course today, people forget to break it down into those attributes that growing, plant is a living organism with millions, if not more than that, variables that are going into it. And so when I came through the facility, it was very interesting to me to see different configurations of Grodan, right? Some sort of blocks on slabs, blocks on large blocks, blocks on unislabs, different types of plugs, and Endless's approach to say, okay, as Gary explained to me, well, we're doing this because we wanted to test that in this specific light configuration, and in this room we're doing this, and we found that if we tweaked this piece and we watered this way, to me that was all amazing to see. And what I love to see from Grodan's perspective is that we enable that. We provide the products and the tools to be able to do that, so that at the end you can get a recipe that's repeatable and that achieves the results you want. And we love to hear back from that feedback on product development too, and say, okay, yeah, well, what if I had a plug that could do this, right? And then we put our engineers on that and our thought process and say, okay, what can we do, knowing what we know about Stonewall and fiber technology and everything else that goes into it.
So you mentioned there's a bunch of different configurations. I'm sure you tour hundreds of grows. Do you see any other grows doing that? Would they try different blocks on the unislabs, different things here and there?
I mean, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Everybody tries all kinds of stuff. I think, at Endless, what I would say is I was impressed by the methodical nature of the approach, which is true. Many people have a tendency to latch onto a configuration that they are comfortable with, and they say, okay, I know this one, I know this, and we have our crop advisors can walk through what we would recommend volume levels of Stonewall, but even that is highly dependent on the environment in the grow. Everything else you're doing, you may find that, okay, the slightly bigger block or a slightly smaller block or a slightly different plant density is going to be optimal. So, yeah, I think everybody tests something. Most grows I see have a tendency to fall into a groove with what they know, and they say, okay, it's working for me, I don't want to change that. And they only want to change one variable at a time, as little as possible.
Right. Gary, you talked about the crop sharing class. Some people come in, they say, I don't want to use Rockwell for whatever reason that is. But whenever people do convert and you show them our results, do you get to hear back from those people saying, hey, you were right, like Grodan really helped us improve our grow?
Well, yeah, there's typically a couple things will happen. One is they'll come back and go, wow, right? Oh, the other one is I tried it, it didn't work, right? And typically what that latter scenario tells you is they didn't really understand how to apply it. It's like you said, first of all, it's a business, and in a business you want consistency. Otherwise, how can you maintain a business, right? And then once you get that consistency, then you can tweak and adapt to changes, both in your business model and in our case on the grow side itself, right? But you have to have some mechanism of consistency or a comfort zone. So some people see comfort over business, if that makes any sense, right? What they know, they're afraid to change, even though their business is lagging. So one of the biggest problems why, to me, it's both parts, is your business model, in essence, is an adaptation of how you compete against other businesses, right? And if you can't adapt that model, to make those changes, then you go out of business. You know, you see that over and over in any industry. And to me, Rockwell is part of the grow business that allows us to do things that other grows can't do. And then by doing so, we got to that point of consistency. Then we started to, okay, now let's start applying science and improve all that. And we started improving because we could take that chance. We're a research-driven grow, and flower wasn't our mainstay. I mean, now it's becoming part of our integral business. However, that tool over the cocoa, or when I first started out growing, I grew in soil, allowed us to adapt our business model to the way that which we want to run that business. And that was part of the key.
John, one thing that you got to do, you got to see kind of a firsthand, or have a firsthand experience of our tissue culture lab, and then some of the tissue culture clones in the Rockwell plugs. What was it like for you to get to see some of like the beginning of where a plant starts going into the clone stage? What were your thoughts on getting to see all that?
That was awesome. Being a business guy, I don't get to spend a lot of time in labs, so for me, I find it fascinating to see that work. And it, you know, and my head started spinning immediately as soon as I saw how they were using the plugs and how the clones were moving through the different stages of development, trying to imagine what we could do to provide better tools for that. But no, I think the concept of moving towards tissue culture and this idea of really driving, let's call them clean genetics, through the cloning process, to me, makes a ton of sense. And it seems like a natural evolution, no pun intended, of the cannabis business of where we're going to end up going, right? If this is going to become an industrialized production, that professional propagation is key, this seems like the solution to me.
Gary, I want to kind of go back a little bit. We've been talking about crop steering. Can you give me just a brief overview of what crop steering is and how you teach it?
Right. So I'm going to go from our perspective, because from my perspective, there's two parts to growing a plant. There's one, as we discussed today during the course, it's the setup of the plant. And if you don't set up the plant, it doesn't matter if you're growing in Rockwell cocoa or not, you're not going to get a good result, right? So the first part of any concept of feeding or steering a plant. So what steering a plant is steering the growth of the plant to a certain way to achieve a certain goal, okay? So let's just say that we set up the plant correctly, and then we want to now feed that plant. So there's all kinds of ways of feeding a plant. However, as I said, there's certain goals you want to achieve. So we break up flowering in three components. We have the first 3 weeks, the middle 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, depending on, and in the last 2 weeks. So in the first 3 weeks, we have a couple goals. The first goal is to get sugar concentration up in the plant. And that's critical because that's the metabolic rate of that plant. And that's what governs the production of hormones, which produce flower and trichome. And if you can't get that sugar production up, then no matter what you try to do, then you can't do you can't achieve good results. But the other part of that achievement is to realize that in the next phase, we're going to push that plant. So there's two things that we do in order to achieve that. So the second thing that we do that helps with that is we do a generative steer. So there's two types of steering that you typically would do. One's a generative steer, which is a 25% dry back roughly, and then a vegetative steer, which is a 15%, okay? Now that can vary slightly, but that's the most part. So we do also in the first 3 weeks a generative steer, and we do that for two reasons. One is we want to reduce the internodal spacing of the plant, and the second reason is we want to tell the plant the end of life's coming. So there's two mechanisms at which that thing occurs. One is by reducing your light on and off times to 12-12. That's a mechanism of causing hormonal changes in the plant, and that tells the plant the end of life's coming. But the generative steer also promotes that same concept. So what that does with a higher sugar concentration is promotes that metabolic rate where we get cellular production much quicker. And so by doing so, that's why we see trichomes and so much earlier. So we're steering the plant for that reason, right? Increase sugar with our environmental variables and the crop steering, and the other is reduce internodal spacing until the plant end of life's coming. So we see flower production and trichome production way earlier than most grows. Like I said, in the course of the day, sometimes we'll see it in 4 or 5 days, trichomes produced, right? So once you do that, but there is one more thing that we do, is we feed with roughly a 2,7 EC at this point. And the reason we're doing that is because in the next phase is where we're going to start really pushing the plant, the next 4 weeks at this point. And if we're going to really push that plant hard, in order to push that plant hard, you had to achieve much higher energy rates and pushing of that plant. So what we do is we feed at a 2.7 roughly EC to a 3.0, and we don't do any runoff. And what we're doing is stacking, what's called stacking the EC in the block. And what we're trying to achieve is roughly an 8 to 9 EC in that media. And the reason we're doing that, and a lot of people will go, wow, you'll burn up the root system, you'll kill the plant. That would be true in certain circumstances if we didn't carry out our methodology. But no, it does not cause the burning of the root system. So what we're doing is stacking it, and when we get to a 10 EC, and that's under max water content, if it may dry back. When it dries back, it may reach as high as 20 EC. But the reason we're doing that is because in the next phase, now we're pushing the plant through extra light, more CO2 and so on, and we'll push 13, 14, 1,500 micromoles or more. And when you're pushing that kind of energy to that plant, it needs to have nutrients available at all times. If you let it start drying out too much, you could literally burn up the system or you can kill the plant, right? So we stack it to an 8 to 10 in order to go to the next phase where we ramp up the EC to 3.5 in the feed. And that way we can start getting runoff and maintain our 8 to 10 while cranking up, in essence, the energy into the plants and pushing those plants harder. So now it can pull nutrients quicker, and we don't see any drought concepts or in the sense of the plant can't get the nutrients that it needs. And so that's why we stack that EC, and we maintain that to roughly the beginning of week 7, and then we switch over to the next phase. Now the next phase is we've already got flour produced at this point, and at that middle point, we're also doing a vegetative feeding. Now vegetative feeding is feeding the plant more often with a less dry back. And by doing so, you're giving it more nutrients. So that's the athletic concept. As an athlete, if you're working out and you're trying to build up muscle mass, you want to eat more often and work out, right? So we're working it out through energy and so on. And that we're also got to feed it to get it to bulk up. So it's bulking up the flour. Then in the last 2 weeks, we don't really care so much about that bulking. It's already primarily done. Now you do get, say, 15% of additional growth at the end, but we continue that. So what we found is a lot of grows start doing what they call flushing. But the problem with that methodology is it starves the plant. And by starving the plant, you can't get that extra 10, 15% production in trichomes both and yield at the end. So what we do is we take that 3.5 EC and we get to week 7, we start dropping at 0.5 every other day till we get to 1.0 EC, and that's usually 2 days before harvest. And what we've done is we're still feeding the plant, we're still getting that growth, but we're reducing the sugar concentrations in the plant, so we start getting rid of the harshness and so on that will eventually be in the flour. And then in the last 2 days, we, in essence, feed the plant RO. And by doing so, we bring all the sugars down, so we turn the lights out as well. We bring all the metabolic rate down, we bring all the sugar production down, and the plant eats the sugar that's in there, and that way it takes all that chemical taste and so on out of the plant. So that's, in essence, steering the plant for certain growth characteristics at certain phases of the...
John, you talked a little bit about the science behind Endless. You got a little taste of it. This is what I go through every day and get to listen to Gary and just absorb everything. So it's a lot, and it's great information that, you know, we teach other growers and we do push you guys' product. And like Gary said, there are some people who are on the fence, but when they switch and they see what we get out of your product along with the crop steering, it just makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I mean, what we like to make sure to say from our team's perspective is when somebody's ready to move into Grodan, and sometimes we joke about it maturing into growing in Grodan, but it's not necessarily that, but it takes some work. But let us help you, right? We're here to help. You know, working with partners like Endless and our own team, we can set you up for success in Grodan. Then you versus you pulling it off the shelf, watering it the same way you watered your cocoa, and then expecting it to act the same way. It's not going to work that way.
Awesome.
So one other quick point. So what we really did was we took Grodan's basic crop stream methodology and applied it to the methodology of how we grow plants with high sugars. And so we I wouldn't say we reinvented it, we just optimized it for this growth methodology.
That's something like, even like Athena, like what they speak about, they give people a good baseline knowledge and let the grower really just apply it to what their needs are too. So one thing I want to talk about is maybe looking forward to the future of some stuff. So what do you think the future of controlled substrate use and maybe biotech and even plant technology is from maybe Grodan's perspective?
I think the future is more adoption, broader use of it, right? And the more people that are using it, the more we can have partners like Endless who are showing us really how to stretch the benefits of stone wool, right? We like to say there's many people that make stone wool. There's only one rock wool and there's only one Grodan, right? That's us. But the more people that are using it, the better we can do. And then coming back to us from a development perspective, what can we do to push the limits of fiber technology and our processes to help steer those, right? What variables can we affect and continue to push to make, at the end of the day, controlled environmental agriculture of any kind is about producing more yield with less resource, right? And that resource being land, labor, water, nutrients, everything else, sunlight, everything. So how can you produce more and more to whether, to service whatever need it is, medicinally or food-based? That's where we're here to help that. We continue to develop products that give you the tools to do that.
Gary, anything you can add to
I
that?
completely agree. It gets back to my original discussion. Your business model drives your business and adapts you to compete in whatever business that you're in. And that's what Rockwell allows us to do. It's a tool, and from a perspective, that allows us to establish the guidelines and the grow methodology and production and yield that we want. And that's what it does. And no other media has been able to compete with it.
So as Endless explores plant tissue culture beyond, cannabis with like strawberries, blueberries, just agriculture in general, how does the use of Grodan really help scale that agriculture, into the...
Well, from a purpose of a tissue culture, we've tried both the cocoa and Rockwell, and we again got right back to our original problem. This cocoa holds on to water too long, and in tissue culture, we found that it created problems, microbial problems, algae problems, and so on. So we needed something that would drain quickly, that we could have better control over. And that's when we went back to the Rockwell microplugs that we use today.
John, with a lot of R&D going on and new innovations, is there anything that Grodan's working on that you can talk about, or anything coming out the pipeline soon?
No. No, I mean, we're always looking at ways to optimize our wetting technologies and our fiber structures. No, I don't have anything I can talk about that's specific. I can say we are working with, like we're working with Endless on the plugs. That's a great example of coming up with ways to provide you plugs that do what you need from either a sterility perspective or a draining perspective, and that's what we continue to focus on. I'd say our primary focuses are actually on the experience side, making it easier for people to convert to using Grodan and making sure that they know how to use it and optimize it when they are, there are literally thousands of growers growing in Grodan today, and I think we could walk into any of them and find a way to help them do it even better, right? And, very few people are doing it as well as you guys are at Endless and utilizing it, and so continuing to expand that is a major goal of ours.
Gary, what about you? Is there anything Endless is working on right now that we can talk about?
We're always working on something. Well, I mean, a couple of things. One is we're working on our tissue culture technology. We're moving over to bioimmersive reactors. That's a new technology because of the tissue culture technology it's used today was used 70 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with it in the sense of it works well and it's reliable. It's just a little bit too labor intensive. It's slow, and you have a high chance of contaminations and so on because of its long requirements for multiplication and so on. So by moving over to immersive bioreactors, it allows us to do this much quicker and produce a healthier plant. And that's that. So on the other side, the grow side, we're looking, one of the things, even though we're teaching this crop stream methodology or what we call advanced irrigation, we're also looking at different ways of doing things. As I mentioned, John, today, we look at how we change temperature. We look at how we adapt lighting to more mimic nature. So one of the things in growing a plant is that the better you can mimic nature for that genetic, then the better it will respond. And so by putting it in an optimal grow methodology, grow media with an optimal crop stream methodology, and you can do the other things that help that genetic, you're going to get a better result. And so we're looking at variety of things like maybe sloping temperature to more mimic the way temperature of the day works, not lights on, 80 degrees, right? Lights off, 65 degrees, whatever that concept is. By slowly increasing temperature, for example, to mimic how nature works, then you might see an improvement in yield. Now I can give you numbers of that, but just initial, we typically think we can see a 3 to 5% improvement by better mimicking nature for that genetic, whether it be a genetic out of Afghanistan or out of Europe or South America, or whatever that concept is, right?
Yep. I know you had mentioned those bioreactors and ramping up tissue culture. That's something I know we're all excited about, getting to see those off the ground. And right now we're still kind of in a test stage of them, but it's so cool to finally see them being implemented. So I think we're going to end it on this. I just want John, your final words on what this partnership means to you, how you see the partnership advancing in the future, and just your overall thoughts.
Yeah, I think, as I've said several times, I think the partnership with Ennis is fantastic for us, and the ability for us to provide you the tools to drive your science, your research, your development. It also the same from our perspective. I think what you mentioned, Gary, it's interesting, all of these other steering methodologies, we see the same thing in terms of driving how to steer the plant with all of the other attributes in the room, whether it's temperature, humidity, lighting, energy, these kinds of things. And so for us to continue to have a partner that we can bounce those ideas off of, that we can do developments together and we can really get the best out of it, and then bring those to market, bring it to the growers, right? And really put them out into the industry and see the industry thrive, and the usage of Grodan continue to expand, and endless supply of tissue clones, right? I think that works.
Yeah.
Gary, what about you?
Well, to kind of plug what we're doing a little bit. So part of what our whole methodology is there's a couple things. One is the methodology about how to grow, and that's a grow itself, right? The other aspect is all the supporting parameters around it, such as disease protection, IPM, and all that, and so on. But the other part of that is training. So one of the things we've seen a deficiency in the overall industry is the ability for people to get up to speed. They tend to go into a grow, whatever that grower that does, I do it this way, and that's how they go. And as John said, they're typically afraid to change or adapt to new things. And that from a business perspective is dangerous in some respects, because if you're not constantly improving, then you're typically going to start lagging behind. So part of what we're also doing with all this is we're building a series of courses, and the whole purpose of that course is to bring up the level of knowledge and capability of all grows. And so we're going to start doing this and releasing these both in online versions and in print versions, and of course with our white paper support. So what that kind of leads into is a knowledge-based system that we're also going to be adapting. And then we'll have partners such as Grodan and other people that will be part of that.
So many great things in the pipeline coming up. Gary, John, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
No, thank you.
Thank you.